are. Thank you for joining us, and please give us a few minutes before we get started to wait for others to join in, please. Okay. Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's virtual tour of the Timken Museum. We're so excited to have you with us this morning. A few housekeeping things before we get started. Please keep yourselves muted throughout today's presentation. If you have any questions, please feel free to use the Zoom chat function by clicking the button at the bottom of your screen that says chat in order to type your question. We'd be happy to address any questions or comments at the end of today's tour. If you're joining us over from Facebook Live, welcome to you as well. You can also ask any questions you may have using the comment section on Facebook, and we'll be monitoring those comments and answering those questions at the end of the tour as well. Lastly, this tour is being recorded and streamed live and will be posted to our social media channels once the tour is over. If you'd like to rewatch this tour or other tours put on by the Timken Museum previously, please check out our YouTube or our Facebook pages to find those. Without further ado, I'm so excited to introduce Eleanor, who will be presenting From Frivolity to Austerity, addressing the Rococo and Neoclassical periods. Thank you so much for being with us today, and I'll turn things over to you, Eleanor.
Thank you, Elsie. Well, good day, everyone, and welcome to today's virtual tour of the Timken Museum. My name is Eleanor Merle, and we'll be talking today on the topic of 18th century French art, specifically the movement from the rather frivolous Rococo art style early in the century to the more austere neoclassical art in the latter part of the 18th century. Now, few eras in French history witnessed the same degree of radical social and political changes as those of the 18th century. The rise of the Ancien Regime and its eventual downfall provide the backdrop to a period of remarkable artistic vitality and variety that subtly chronicled the many changes taking place in France. The death of Louis XIV in 1715 brought an end to his autocratic reign. Succeeding him was Louis XV, who came into power as a 5-year-old boy child, while the French court relished their newfound freedom and partied in more ways than one. There was an immediate reaction against the Baroque pomp and splendor that characterized Louis XIV's long reign. The symmetrical heaviness of Baroque style gave way to the new and lighter Rococo style, characterized by greater informality, elaborate ornamentation, asymmetrical values, pastel color palette, decorative scroll work based on C and S curves by flowers, shells, and lighter colors, and a general sense of gaiety, gallantry, and prettiness. The Rococo style was initially represented in architecture. Here, you can compare the heavy Baroque style of Louis XIV's Versailles Palace with the Catherine Palace near St. Petersburg in Russia. Rococo painters such as Antoine Watteau, François Boucher, and Jean-Honoré Fragonard moved away from the grandiose subjects of Baroque art, which emphasized religion, to explore more playful themes of young lovers in lush gardens or lavish bedrooms, flirting, playing games, or engaged in other amorous pursuits. Antoine Watteau is considered to be the first great Rococo painter. His influence is visible in the work of later Rococo painters such as Francois Boucher and Honoré Fragonard. Watteau is known for his soft application of paint, dreamy atmosphere, and a depiction of classical themes that often revolve around youth and love, exemplified in the painting Pilgrimage to Cythera. Francois Boucher became a master of Rococo painting somewhat later than Watteau. His work exemplifies many of the same characteristics, though with a slightly more mischievous and suggestive tone. Boucher's work is represented in the Timken's Lovers in a Park, a pastoral composition from 1758. Note that a pastoral landscape depicts an idealized view of nature. It often includes shepherds. The display of nonchalant whimsy and carefree demeanor reflects this time. On a canvas more than 7.5 feet high, Boucher conjured up a fairy tale vision of a lush landscape peopled with graceful and sweet-tempered figures. The delicate pastel color scheme and the fluid painting technique, most vivid in the creamy folds of the seated woman's dress and in the richly worked foliage of the trees and bushes, epitomize Boucher's Rococo style, which by the 1750s had reached a level of virtuosity unparalleled by the artist's contemporaries. The subject, such as it is lighthearted and whimsical, in keeping with the essentially decorative character of the painting. An amorous young couple, perhaps out for a stroll in the countryside or grounds of an overgrown estate, has stopped to rest beneath a sculpture of two amorini or babies who look in the same directions as the lovers. A spaniel in the foreground likely represents fidelity. Interestingly, it turns away from the couple. The man has taken flowers from the woman's hair and is weaving them into his lover's hair, whose thoughts appear to wander. His attention, meanwhile, is distracted by the appearance of a young girl. Her less elaborate costume suggests that she's a milkmaid or a shepherdess who walks into the scene. She's been gathering her own flowers, which she carries in baskets suspended at the ends of a pole. A dove house is in the background. Now, the artist took great care in arranging the postures, gestures, and glances of the three figures to create a harmonious, well-balanced composition. Note that all of the pastel colors used in the painting are also in the bouquet of flowers in the woman's upturned hat on the right side of the composition. The light comes from the front as in a theater, which reminds us that Boucher also created stage designs. Boucher makes no pretense of portraying a believable situation with the work's doll-like figures and candy box colors. His world is rather a modern Arcadia in which a fecund and radiant nature is inhabited by cheerful country folk and pleasant, complacent lovers. The potentially uneasy encounter between the peasant girl and the elegant young couple is diffused by the artist's idealizing vision and the pastoral genre, which allowed few signs of strife or conflict. Now, during the 18th century, it was fashionable for the aristocracy to escape from the strict etiquette of the French court by going to secluded rustic retreats and living there as though they were simple country people. On these retreats, they dressed in elaborate versions of peasant clothing and strolled in private gardens. The lovers' satin clothes show that they're aristocrats, but the milkmaids' beribboned garments are the kind of idealized peasant garbs sported for fun by royal and aristocratic ladies of the time. Marie Antoinette had this hermitage on the left, built on the property of Versailles in 1749. Madame Pompadour wrote to her friend, Madame de Luxembourg, "I spent half my life at the Hermitage. Compare it with the very formal and manicured gardens of Versailles." Francois Boucher was born in Paris in 1703, where he would die in 1770. He was first taught by his father, Nicholas, who was a decorator who specialized in embroidery. He then studied under an esteemed engraver. During this time, he engraved many of Watteau's drawings and became familiar with Watteau's style. By the time he was 18, he'd been awarded the Prix de Rome, a scholarship to study in Italy. When he returned to Paris after 5 years, he was admitted into the Royal Academy of Painting and Sculpture, becoming a member after 3 years. He gained the acclaim and attention of royalty and soon was winning commissions from the French crown and aristocracy, which earned him an international reputation of much renown. He was known for his mythological and pastoral landscapes, religious paintings, genre scenes, and portraits. He became Madame de Pompadour's favorite artist, which bode well for him, being that she was Louis XV's official chief mistress and very influential. Boucher essentially became her personal painter. Now, Boucher also contributed designs for the Beauvais and Gobelin tapestry works and the Sèvres porcelain factory, as well as sets and costumes for the theater. 5 years prior to his death, he was appointed as the first painter to the king and elected director of the Academy. Here's a soup tureen with a Boucher work in the bottom. And if you have a tea set, it might be decorated with Boucher images. Take a look. By the time Boucher painted Lovers in a Park, his fanciful style was being criticized as too artificial by advocates of more substantive subjects and settings. The philosopher Denis Diderot, an early champion of the artist, came to see Boucher's later works as corrupt and even immoral. A caustic comment 3 years after the Timkins' Lovers in a Park was painted underscores Diderot's ambivalent view of Boucher as a brilliant but misguided painter. I quote, "What colors, what variety, what a richness of objects and ideas. The man is capable of everything except the truth." There was controversy later in his career as Boucher received some moral criticism from people such as Diderot for the themes present in his work. Blonde Odalisque was thought to depict an affair of King Louis XV. The work employs serpentine lines, a reasonably pastel palette, and themes of love indicative of Rococo artwork. Now, Jean-Honoré Fragonard was one of Boucher's pupils, and the Timken is privileged to also have one of his works, Blind Man's Buff. Along with his teacher, Francois Boucher, Jean-Honoré Fragonard is regarded as the leading painter of the light-hearted French Rococo style that, as we mentioned, characterized the reigns of King Louis XV and his grandson, Louis XVI. Indeed, Fragonard's facility at depicting elegant, amorous scenes of 18th century life led to several important commissions from Madame de Barry, Louis XV's last mistress. Born in Grasse, Fragonard moved to Paris at an early age, and he studied in the studio of Boucher. In 1774, he returned from a tour in Italy with a great interest in painting landscapes, especially scenes of aristocrats amusing themselves in verdant, overgrown gardens. This resulted in some of his finest mature canvases, including this one. The figures here seem to be gazing at something beyond the canvas. Indeed, this painting is probably a fragment of a considerably larger work done between 1775 and 1780. Its subject was probably also Blind Man's Buff. A game in progress on the missing left side would explain the rapt attention of these elegant ladies and gentlemen. Now, in the game, a blindfolded player attempts to capture his or her companions. Here, beneath the pink parasol, a young man is being blindfolded by several eager young ladies. Perhaps he's about to join in. Above them, in a large fountain, a sculptured goddess extends an arm as if to bless this delightful activity. Blind Man's Buff, often a game of teasing flirtation, is a theme in several of Fragonard's works, along with other pastimes viewed as variations of the eternal game of love. And I quote, "The scene is lighthearted. In fact, the lightheartedness is in the technique. It looks almost like a colored drawing. Fragonard is painted very lightly. His colors are applied thinly so that undercolors come through. This produces a cloud-like effect, almost as if this representation was a dream." And this was a quote from an art historian. Despite the overall playfulness of the picture, the gray sky and fluttering leaves suggest wind rising before a storm. Together with the overturned planter in the foreground, these may be metaphors for the moment of sadness and misunderstanding that accompany pursuits of love. Another of Fragonard's well-known works from this period is entitled The Swing, and it dates from 1767. As with Lovers in the Park and Blind Man's Buff, this work is placed inside a lush garden. A young woman in a billowing pink gown glides through the air. Her suspension high above the ground is enabled by a swing consisting of a crimson velvet cushioned seat and a pair of ropes tied around the knobby branches of an enormous tree. The older man operating the swing is presumably the husband of the young woman. His smiling expression as he gazes at his wife suggests he's blissfully unaware of her hidden lover. Oops. Using a series of connected ropes, he pulls the swing back to create the momentum necessary to propel the woman forward. As he releases the ropes, she leans back and extends her legs, expelling a tiny pink slipper from her pointed foot. The dainty shoe flies through the air toward a marble statue on the far left. At the base of the large pedestal supporting this sculpture lies a young man, partially hidden by an overgrown rose bush. He peers wide-eyed up into the open skirt of the swinging woman, and notice the amorini underneath the swing. A gentleman of the court reportedly requested that Fragonard represent his mistress being pushed on a swing as he secretly admired her from below. While the figures in the work aren't identifiable as portraits of specific individuals, their rich attire and leisurely activity underline their aristocratic status. Despite his success, Fragonard declined to pursue a public career as a history painter, preferring to work for a private clientele of financiers and courtiers. Over the course of 4 decades, he produced many brilliantly realized easel paintings and large decorative works. During the Revolution, Fragonard fled to his native Grasse, returning to Paris in 1793, where Jacques-Louis David, who we'll see shortly, appointed him curator at the new National Museum. Let's now take a look at 2 grand portraits by Nicolas de Largellière, who was pivotal in the transition from the Baroque to the Rococo portrait style during the reigns of Louis XIV and XV. Now, if you were somebody in early 18th century France, you definitely wanted to have your likeness painted by an important artist as proof of noble lineage and evidence of high social standing. Portraits counted among essential decor in that country's elite households. And should you happen to be in Paris and weren't a member of the royal family, it would have been in your best interest to approach Nicolas de Largellière for this task. Largellière's solid academic training meant that he was skilled at depicting courtiers in environments that communicated their prosperity and prestige. And because he lived for a long time, this painter was familiar with his sitters' expectations for both grand manner portraiture of the late Baroque period and more modern Rococo sensibilities. Depending on your taste and outlook, a cosmopolitan flatterer like Largellière was equipped to provide a wealthy married couple with everything they desired in self-representation. Something of a prodigy, Largellière was admitted to the Painters Guild of St. Luke when he was only 17. After spending time in London, where he painted several still life paintings in the style of Dutch and Flemish masters, he settled in Paris in 1679, where he specialized in Baroque portraiture in the grand manner of Rubens and Anthony van Dyck. He was pivotal in the transition from the Baroque to the Rococo portrait style. He had a very large and prolific workshop that produced over 1,500 portraits. These 2 grand portraits are among Largellière's masterpieces, demonstrating years of the artist refining his skills and perfecting his talents. They were commissioned when Largellière was 73 years old and still at the pinnacle of his career. We have in these portraits a somewhat royal depiction of Mr. and Mrs. Pupil. Now, Barthélemy Jean-Claude Pupil is in this grand portrait, and Monsieur Pupil opted to be portrayed in a relaxed yet professionally determined demeanor, wearing a long powdered wig known as a peruke and dressed in black satin judicial robes with a red cape. He gazes back at his viewer with impartiality and quiet confidence. His right forearm is draped casually over an oversized leather-bound legal text with more grand tomes behind him, partly hidden by elegant drapery, possibly his law library. His expression exudes a sense of well-nourished self-satisfaction that we might expect of a man at the summit of his profession. He was a prominent jurist, after all. Pupil had several years earlier married his social superior, Marguerite de Sèvres, and as a consequence of that marriage, he was awarded a series of increasingly prestigious legal appointments in Lyon. Largellière has posed his subject as a public figure in the cascading wig and robes of a judge. The artist reveals his technical virtuosity in the lavish depiction of the robe's sumptuous fabric, shining black satin, the fine starched linen of collar and cuffs, and rich scarlet velvet, with contrasting colors to enhance depth. Now, as a trivia note, wigs for men became popular during the reign of King Louis XIII, which began in 1601. He pioneered the fashion in 1624 when he became prematurely bald. They were promoted by Louis XIV and spread to other European countries. Wig styles were defined by social status and standing, and generally the higher a wig, the higher in stature the man wearing it, hence the term big wig. Now, Marguerite de Sèvres came from a Lyonnese family whose importance is suggested by her regal bearing and her expression of confidence. Indeed, the setting and props were called contemporary royal portraiture. The wall behind her is covered in expensive blue damask, or perhaps flocking. Baroque in style, her fur-trimmed scarlet robes evoke royal velvet and ermine, and her powdered hair ornaments hint at a tiara. By contrast with her more soberly dressed upright husband, Madame Poupille poses while garbed in a shimmering red gown trimmed with fur sleeves. Notice again, La Joyeuse was just exquisite in his representation of fabrics. She wears an ornamental cuirass or armored breastplate, from the top of which freshly cut carnations burst. And this was quite the style of the time in lieu of jewelry. This extraordinary embossed and jeweled gilded bodice was a common prop during the 18th century to pay homage to the ancient world, as well as to attribute qualities of a god or goddess to the subject herself. Madame's bodice suggests the armor of Minerva, the Roman goddess of wisdom. She has sprigs of flowers in her hair, and she wields a silver fan in her hand. Now, scholars have observed that the sheet music she fingers in her other hand relates to a popular drinking song. A slight smile, perhaps even a smirk, enlivens her heart-shaped face. Part goddess of war, part party animal, it's hard to escape the notion that Marguerite de Sèvres was a full partner in La Joyeuse's creation of a likeness at once full of vitality and suggestive of the sitter's potential for mischief. Now, the whole lavish costume may have been constructed on the spot from props in the artist's studio. We know that La Joyeuse was the owner of this carved and painted harpsichord. Interestingly, the music on the keyboard instrument has 6 rather than 5 stave lines, indicating its music is intended to be played on a stringed instrument, such as a lute or theorbo, and not on a keyboard instrument. Underneath, clearly legible, are the words of a drinking song, "Drink a lot, my dear friends, drink to the health." Such songs were fashionable for sophisticated women to sing at an evening gathering at home. The song actually comes from Molière's The Bourgeois Gentilhomme, his theater work. Now, the fan, which Madame de Sèvres holds furled in her right hand, was an important accessory in 18th century France. It might be used to peek at a particular gentleman, carried in such a way to indicate they were married or single, and when closed, used to tap someone on the shoulder if they wished to talk with them. But in general, fans were usually considered utilitarian at the time. Women used them to regulate the air temperature. Now, there's no doubting that the 2 large portraits at the Timken were intended to be shown side by side. They descended together through the Poupille family tree until 1969, after which they were acquired by the Putnam Foundation for the Timken Museum. According to the rhetoric of their time, they were unquestionably and determinedly a pair. Indeed, Monsieur and Madame Poupille appear to be a nearly perfect couple. Their canvases are sized the same, and respectively, they possess the complementary gendered stereotypes that 18th century French society conferred upon them. He is a man of laws and she is a creature of culture. Temperamentally, however, they couldn't look more different. Now, by the 1760s, there was a move away from Rococo frivolity to the more severe Neoclassical period, more in sync with the moral climate of the final years of the French monarchy. Jacques-Louis David, considered the preeminent neoclassical painter of his day, was best known for his huge history paintings, characterized by themes and styles from ancient Greece and Rome. Here's one of his best-known works, Oath of the Hierarchy. He also dabbled a bit at the start of his career in the Rococo style. As with the Boucher and Fragonard works, we have a noble woman playing by dressing up in costume. Now, this intimate portrait of the Irish timber merchant Cooper Penrose in the Timken reveals why David was also considered the first great portrait painter of the 19th century. Cooper Penrose, a Quaker, traveled from Ireland to Paris in 1802 to commission David to paint his portrait, fully aware of David's reputation. As Penrose's wealth grew in the timber business, he became an avid collector of art, which included Rubens and Raphael, antiques, and other worldly treasures. He lived on a 40-acre estate with a lavish home, which was referred to as the Irish Vatican, and it was included in guidebooks as a site not to miss. It's said that his tastes were so lavish that the Society of Friends threatened to expel him. Yet, judging from the small number of portraits David actually painted during these years, one suspects that Penrose's commission resulted from a certain amount of persuasion on the part of the aspiring sitter. It may well be that his niece, Julia, helped provide Penrose initial access to David as she was a student of his. Then the high price agreed on for the work, 200 gold louis, was a strong argument at a time when David was reputedly well off, but with a family to provide for. And in all likelihood, Penrose clinched the deal by making it clear that he not only admired the painter, but also sympathized with his civic ideals. In an undated letter from David to the sitter contracting for the work, he said, and I quote, "Mr. Penrose can have complete trust in me. I'll paint his portrait for him for 200 gold louis. I'll represent him in a manner worthy of both of us. This picture will be a monument that will testify to Ireland the virtues of a good father and the talent of the painter who will have rendered them," end of quote. Note that 200 louis was a sizable sum when the going rate at the time in Paris for a portrait was between 500 and 100 louis, 50 and 100 louis, pardon me. The finished painting, a 3/4 length portrait, shows Penrose appearing to be a small man at 66 years of age, seating stiffly in a mahogany neoclassical armchair. The focus is entirely on Penrose, dressed simply in a somber black cutaway jacket, a white waistcoat, dark gray green breeches, and white stockings, without even a ring or scarf pin to sound a showy note. And this was befitting his Quaker beliefs. There's no evidence of the sitter's high social status, great wealth, or frivolous lifestyle. David brings the sitter down to earth by positioning the head lower on the canvas than is traditional in French portraiture. The plain background, reminiscent of 17th century Dutch portraits, was quite unusual at the time and focuses one's full attention on the sitter. The idea that the human figure doesn't need accessories to express its full dignity is probably what's most new about this conception of the portrait. Contrast this simple, austere, and spare realistic portrait with the lavish and luxurious portraits of the aristocracy and nobility of the Rococo period, which we just saw in the La Jolière portraits. Now, I have a query. Might Penrose have requested a restrained and sober appearance to combat potential Quaker criticism? We don't know whether he provided such directives to David or it was David's aesthetic choice. Attention is drawn to the brilliantly painted head and hands, which form a triangle in the center of the composition. There, David reveals Penrose's complex personality. The silver white wings of hair at his ears may suggest a restrained flair for personal style. The ruddy cheeks, a robust delight in life. The eyes, crowned by strong arched eyebrows, a lively glint of shrewdness. Even Penrose's mouth has a quizzical tilt, rather like the Mona Lisa's. The animated hands offer the final clue to character. One hanging down, vain and elegant, the other with fingers touching, ready to hold a manuscript or a pair of reading glasses, or engage in conversation. Behind the honest businessman is a refined connoisseur. And I would like to think that this is someone, if we met him in a social gathering, would be someone who would be interesting to talk to. Now, Jacques-Louis David was born in Paris into a wealthy family. His father was an iron merchant who was killed in a duel when David was just 9 years old. His mother came from a family of builders and architects and was distantly related to Francois Boucher. Here's a self-portrait from 1794 when David was 46 years old. David's family wanted him to become an architect, but he favored painting from an early age and won them over. Following the advice of Boucher, his first teacher, David was placed in the studio of Joseph-Marie Vienne, the leading promoter of the Neoclassical reaction against the Rococo. When David was finally awarded the Prix de Rome after 4 attempts, he left for Italy in 1775, where he studied the works of Raphael and the 17th century masters, such as Poussin and Caravaggio. He visited and became deeply impressed with the classical ruins, deepening his belief in the virtue of classical culture over the indulgent Rococo style. He returned to Paris in 1780 and was made an official member of the Royal Academy. But David was more than a painter. He was as political an artist as ever lived. He was a leader of the French Revolution, a prominent member of the radical Jacobin Party, and a close friend of the infamous tyrant Maximilien Robespierre, leader of the Reign of Terror. When Robespierre fell from power and was guillotined, David was imprisoned for 2 years from 1774 to 1775. But no sooner was he out of prison that David managed once again to align himself with the leader of yet another political regime, Napoleon Bonaparte. Napoleon liked David's paintings, and David became the official first court painter of the Emperor Napoleon Bonaparte. Napoleon awarded him France's highest medal of honor, a Chevalier de la Légion d'honneur in 1803, 1 year after he painted the portrait of Cooper Penrose. Here's a portrait from 1802 of Napoleon crossing the Alps, a very famous portrait. After Napoleon fell from power and the Bourbons returned to the throne, David was on the bad list of former revolutionaries and Bonapartes who voted for the execution of Louis XVI and who participated in the death of Louis XVII. Nevertheless, the newly restored Bourbon king, Louis XVIII, granted amnesty to David and offered him the position of court painter. But David refused, preferring self-exile in Brussels, where he remained until his death. This brings our tour to a close. I hope you enjoyed this virtual journey through the 18th century French paintings. I'm now glad to take any questions or comments you may have, and thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Eleanor, for such a wonderful tour. And yes, we'd be happy to take any questions or comments. Eleanor, I actually am wondering, because I have very elementary knowledge on this period, but would you say elements of neoclassicism were closely inspired by Spanish Romanticism at the time, like Goya, and the sort of same revolutionary spirit going on in Europe at the time?
Yes, Spain was going through, Spain did not really have the Rococo, period, but they had the, Baroque, more classical period. So I think that is the case, although I'm not as familiar with Spanish works of this period as I am of the French works. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's so fascinating. I think David's Death of Marat and a lot of Goya's revolutionary works were very similar. And I still find that the post-revolutionary art was just as melodramatic as Rococo and maybe Baroque art. So I just think it's interesting how the drama remains.
Yeah.
Okay, so it looks like we don't have any comments or questions from the Facebook Live. So before you go, I would like to remind everybody that this tour and other tours put on previously through the Timken can be found on our social media channels, Facebook or YouTube page. And if you'd like further information on future tours, please check out our website events calendars for those details. And thank you again for joining us this morning. Thank you, Eleanor, for again such a wonderful, beautiful tour. And goodbye, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good holiday.